What is up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Scott from FudgeMuppet, and today I have for you the best Outer Worlds build. And it may surprise you, especially coming from us, as people who like to min-max our builds with contrasted strengths and weaknesses. Of course, this would depend on how you categorize best, and there are other builds that will be more highly specialized and really great at one thing, but I call this the best build because it allows you to get the best outcomes in the game by passing pretty much every single check you ever need, whether that be dialogue skills like persuade and lie, whether that be tech skills like science or engineering, or whether that be skills like hacking and lockpicking. This character has it all. All the important skills can get an effective value of 100, but you may say, well, what about combat? Surely it must give up combat potential, and I have to say, not really, mainly because of your companions. Because of all your beast skills, you will be able to buff the hell out of your companions with gear, as well as high inspiration and determination skills, and they will just waltz through cleaning up, and you may pop off a shot or two if you like. And on top of all this, any combat shortcomings you particularly have are completely mitigated by the beefed up gear that you will be able to equip yourself with. Now, I do want to throw out there that I do not know how this build would go down on supernova difficulty because of variables like companions permanently dying, but on normal or hard, this is the best from my testing. It's the ideal build for someone who wants the best outcomes, the person who wants to complete all the quests in the best way, come out with everyone all holding hands and loving each other. This build, like I already touched on, does rely heavily on companions, and for this reason, I called this build the Captain. Timestamps are in the description below, but without further ado, let's get into the video, starting with character creation. So let's first dive into attributes, the building blocks of your character. You can at no point change these, so it's something you need to think about. Now, unlike some other RPGs, namely New Vegas, there doesn't seem to be any background fine print hidden effects of these attributes. Intelligence doesn't give you more skill points on level up, perception doesn't increase your accuracy. What you see is what you get. Every description is very clear about what it does, but do note that there are sometimes dialogue options based on your attribute level, but they are relatively rare. My first playthrough essentially ended up being a gimped version of this build because I highly specialized into intelligence and charm, but upon a second playthrough with this all-rounder style, I achieved pretty much the exact same thing without suffering low attribute penalties. So it's not that exciting, but you want to put 1 point into every single stat, resulting in a good ranking for every single attribute. Now it's time to explain the rationale. I'll go through all the stats and explain why. For strength and dexterity, the main reason I didn't lower these is A, to give you a soft boost to combat and higher carry weight for all the gear you will want to carry for your companions, switching it up, and then B, because I want all the skill values to remain balanced, so every single skill point you invest has bang for your buck. I will elaborate more on this in a minute. Now, come to intelligence and perception, it's the same kind of deal. They both add bonuses to your combat through critical damage and weak spot damage bonuses, but we mainly make them good for the sake of skill balance. Now come to charm and temperament. Charm at first glance is very appealing because of the companion ability refresh, but the 45% boost you get at very high charm almost proved to be a waste for me, because I would often use their ability once at the start of battle, then 5 seconds later before the cooldown is done, they've just obliterated everything before I could use it again. And that was with very high charm. The other thing I noticed is that reputation boosts at very high charm almost felt excessive, because I would do a few quests for a faction and then I'm already basically revered, but then still wanted to do the rest of their quests anyway, but I wasn't going to actually gain any additional reputation. Good charm turned out to be perfect, and in addition, there's the skill balance. Now, temperament was something I had a slightly higher ranking in on my first playthrough, but the additional health regen didn't prove to be that necessary because I had so much adreno just from looting and could easily heal always, and on top of that, there's the skill balance. So let's just for a second explain what I mean about skill balance. You can see here that every single one of my skills has a value of 12 because of the perfectly balanced attributes. In Outer Worlds, you can invest in the skill group, like dialogue for instance, until one becomes a value of 50. Then you can increase individually, or you can continue investing in the group until the others reach 50. But the advantage of having the value balanced at the beginning is that you are getting the most bang for your buck. For example, here I am able to take tech from 12 to 50 with 38 points. That includes medical, science, and engineering. If instead I began the game with, say, a skill value of 8 in engineering and 15 in medical and science, because of the attributes I chose, it would instead take me 35 points to take medical and science to 50, but then I would have to invest a further 7 points to bring only engineering up to 50, meaning getting all the skills to 50 took 42 skill points instead of 38. This can be made even more drastic if you have, say, like 20 in one skill, 12 in another, and 5 in another one, all in the same group. So you can see how with a perfect skill balance of 12, every single point increases the 2 or 3 skills up to 50. Now, of course, if you are aiming for 100 in a skill, maybe you want to have your stats realigned to do that, but this build is focused around companion skill bonuses, buffing your own skills to 80s, 90s, or even 100s, depending on gear, companion combinations, and perks. Remember, we want this character to be able to effectively do everything, though as the captain, you do take a more supportive role in combat, but are still highly effective. Now, in terms of starting skill set, there are a few things I want to pose to you. For starters, I did not find combat particularly difficult in this game and don't think it requires a heavy investment unless you are a combat-focused build, like a gunslinger. In fact, you can get away with not investing in any combat skills, or maybe just 8 points to get them to 20 so you can unlock weak spot visibility and time dilation, but it's still not necessary. These skills don't actually affect flat damage either. They just increase crit chance and reduce weapon sway. Now, there is one skill that is ridiculously powerful and incredibly important for this build, and that would be inspiration. At 60 inspiration, your companion bonuses to your skills are increased by 100%, which leads to some insane bonuses. Numbers like plus 37 and plus 42, meaning you can have 60 in a skill but still have it effectively boosted to 100 with your companions. This is the secret sauce. This is how you will be able to master all skills. Good old teamwork. For this build, you can effectively forget about melee, ranged, and defense groups. If you have spare points, then go wild, but ideally, we want to focus on dialogue, stealth, tech, and leadership. For our chosen skills to boost, I would personally pick leadership to make sure we can get inspiration 60 sooner rather than later, and then probably stealth. You won't have to worry about upgrading your weapons or fighting super tough fights where you will need medical buffs or anything in the first area. Also, it's worth noting that in the first area, the speech checks are really easy. I don't remember seeing anything above 30, with most of them being 5s and 15s. And do note, if you do everything in the Emerald Vale, you should leave about level 7, so there's plenty of time to bring those skills up for the next sections. But for that reason, I think the other starting skill investment should go into stealth, not because we are going to be a sneaky character, but mainly for hacking and lockpicking, so we get the most amount of access to locked up gear and bits, as well as the ability to sell to vending machines, which is convenient. It basically sets us up to make a lot of bits. We'll talk more about skills and perks in a later section, but let's finish up character creation. Now, for the little aptitude backstory bit here, do not pick one with skill bonuses because it will mess up the perfect skill balance we had going there. Instead, go for one of them with resistances, such as janitor, safety inspector, dirt farmer, or electrical cable dude. I actually like janitor because I do remember getting hit with corrosive a fair bit, but then again, it doesn't really matter because it's only minus 3%. Now, obviously, you can make your character look how you want and name them what you want. Alright, so now you have your character, it's time to break it down. Firstly, you will hit level 2 when you get to the unreliable, basically the very first tutorial mission part. Now, I would recommend getting the tech and dialogue skills up to 22 first, at levels 2 and 3, then dumping into leadership for the next levels, mainly to get access to inspiration 60, which will double your skill bonuses from companions. This is critical. This way, you should have a high enough skill through Pavati's bonuses and gears that you should be able to do all of the checks you want in the first area. You will want to get the first companion, Pavati, ASAP, but I'll talk about that in the next section. Now, once you leave the first area at about level 7, you should have a 22 base value skill in dialogue, stealth, and tech skills, as well as determination at 50 and inspiration 60. By now, you will have Vicar Max and Pavati as companions, and with their respective skill boosts for engineering and hacking, you should have an amazing base for your character to continue the game with. Now, from here I would recommend focus on getting the dialogue, tech, and stealth skills to a value of 50 over the next coming levels, with a priority on dialogue and stealth, as persuade, hacking, and lockpicking will come in handy sooner. Remember, inspiration and determination both give your companions massive buffs to their health and damage output, so combat should be relatively easy as well, meaning you don't really have to invest in any of the combat skills at all. Once you have the tech, dialogue, and stealth skills at 50, you can start bringing some to 60 to help get their effective levels to 100. You'll want to utilize gear and mods to boost skills further, but I'll talk about that more in the gear section. Now, you can see here skills are at an effective value of 80s, 90s, or 100s, despite having an actual skill level of 50 or 60. Now, I do have to give you a little disclaimer. The abilities that are unlocked at skill level 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100 are based off real investment only, which means here when I have 60 in hacking, but 102 effective value, I do not have the abilities for skill level 80 and 100 hacking. However, on the bright side, many of these just aren't that necessary or are quite niche. So ultimately, we will still be able to lockpick, hack, or persuade our way through pretty much anything. Also, just note persuade usually covers most speech checks, and if not, intimidate 95 or lie 65 will usually do the job. I don't think investing further in these skills is necessary, especially with some of the later game gear, which will boost the dialogue skills even further. Also, sneak isn't really part of this character's playstyle, it just came for free with the investment into stealth. I would like to say that science in particular may be worth investing far more points into, mainly for the abilities which reduce tinkering costs, allowing you to easily and cheaply buff the hell out of you and your companions' gear and weapons, which makes your combat performance insane. And on top of that, I'd recommend going further into inspiration and determination to take your companions even further, but to be honest, I found that they're pretty powerful with 60 in each skill, with an effective value of 70 to 80 depending on gear. So I would probably say go into science or medical if you would prefer. You could also do some combat skill stuff, but honestly, your companions just clean up for you, which even turns out better when you consider some of the perks. Speaking of perks, let's talk about them. In the Outer Worlds, perks are pretty straightforward and not that crazy. However, there are some absolute essentials for certain builds. Extra sprint speed and walk speed are just great convenience perks, and to be honest, for this style of character, you can afford to have them. But let's talk about the absolute standout essentials and some of the recommended ones. The first absolute essential is Deadly Demonstrations from Tier 1, which increases the amount of experience earned from companion kills by 50%. Now this, taken early with Pavati, makes this build extremely effective. It makes it so you basically weaken enemies with a few shots, and you then let your companions take care of the rest, or instead, just let them take charge and focus on keeping them healed and functioning. This way you earn way more XP from battles. More XP means more levels sooner means more skills sooner means you'll be passing all the skill checks and buffing your companions and gear sooner through tinkering, perks, and leadership skills. It's just so helpful, so remember, either let your companion do it or weaken an enemy and let them finish it off. For example, I generally used this Deadeye assault rifle and just dropped a few shots and then let my companions take charge. I am the support, my companions are the executioners. The next absolute beast of a perk is Armor Master in Tier 3. Make it the first perk you get at level 22 or earlier if you have taken floors. It increases armor rating, big whoop, but the main thing it does is increase armor skill bonuses by 100%. Disclaimer though, it does not double the effects of the mods on your armor. But anyways, that means if you have armor with +5 to dialogue skills, that becomes +10. If you have a hat with +5 to leadership and +7 to persuade, that becomes +10 to leadership and +14 to persuade. You can see how drastically it can beef up your character, and once again, it helps us maintain high effective skill values with only moderate skill investment. So they are the absolute essentials, but outside of this, things like carry weight perks are actually quite useful because you'll be carrying lots of gear to swap out and weapons being held for your companions, stuff like that. You can go into time dilation and combat perks, but once again, your companions do most of it. Vendor price perks can help you get rich, but to be honest, high amounts of bits aren't that hard to acquire without them. I mentioned before movement speed ones are nice because they're convenient, but honestly, I would prioritize companion-based perks like precision, which increases companion crit chance by 15%, or tag team, which means when you use a companion ability, it has a 25% chance to reset the cooldown of your other companion's ability. Ultimately, this build functions really well with a few perks, so you may not even need to bother with flaws. Speaking of which, just remember that flaws often affect your party as well. I wouldn't really recommend you get any flaws with the exception of drug addiction, which means you suffer attribute debuffs when you haven't used drugs in a while. However, personally, I ended up with heaps of Adreno, so I could always just use the inhaler when the withdrawal popped up, and I got a free perk point out of it. And phobia flaws of less common creatures like primals can be worthwhile as well, but I think that just about covers it all. So let's look into companions. Okay, so since this is a companion-based character, you will want to get your hands on Parvati, the first companion, ASAP, and you'll want Vicar Max for when you leave Emerald Vale. And to be honest, I found these to be the best companions in terms of personality and interest, but they also complement the Captain build incredibly well in terms of skills. I would 100% recommend doing other companion quests just for curiosity's sake and XP, but I'd always used Vicar Max and Parvati as my primaries for this character. Without spoiling anything, I kit Vicar Max out with the legendary MSI gear and Parvati with legendary Iconoclast gear, which you can get through the respective factions' mission lines. I'll touch on that in the role-playing section. Now, for whatever reason, I find that my companions did best when using heavy weapons. I gave them both either standard or legendary versions of light or heavy machine guns and just let them rip. And also, I personally found that I prefer to just set their fight style to ranged only, as it seemed most effective, exposing them to the least damage. In regards to their perks, I keep it real simple. I buff their skill bonus perks, engineering for Parvati and hacking for Max. I buff their base health by 30%, and I buff their ranged damage by 10%, as well as their companion ability damage by 30%. The rest is really up to you. But now let's talk about the Captain himself for a bit. What does he wear and use? This build is very flexible, usually sticking to gear that boosts the needed skills at the time, so usually light or medium armors, and weapons I prefer are generally long guns, rifles and such that help you keep a bit of range while your companions clean up. Ideally, an earlier type level armor you should aim to get is protective clothing with safety harness that has +5 to dialogue skills, +10 with armor master perk, and you should ideally mod it with the silver tongue kit giving +5 to dialogue and +10 to leadership. A hat called A Nice Hat can be found in the OSI Church in Stellar Bay Ruins, and it grants +5 to leadership, +10 with armor master, and +7 persuade, +14 with armor master. But of course, there is an ideal late game armor called Chimera, which grants +10 dialogue, +20 with armor master, as well as an armor rating of 53 despite being light armor. You can get this from a quest in Byzantium. We'll have a guide on this soon. As for your weapon choices, my favorite for this build was the Deadeye Assault Rifle, which functions pretty much like a sniper rifle. I modded it for plasma damage and just sort of took some pot shots while my companions did most of the work. Whenever I generally got new or legendary weapons, I prioritized giving them to my companions. Now that I think we've discussed everything that needs to be talked about in terms of the actual build, in terms of skills, perks, attributes, progression, gear, all the statistically important stuff, but now I wanted to talk about the backstory and role-playing. If you're familiar with us here at FudgeMuppet, we love to create backstories and role-playing different characters with different motivations and such. Now, we know Outer Worlds is pretty fresh, so we don't want to talk spoilers or anything. In future builds, we'll probably have more niche role-playing perspectives, but this one is more straightforward. And as far as backstory is concerned, we're thinking we'll keep it rather brief, bio style, so here it goes, and then we'll go on to the role-playing and factions. The Captain was born on Earth. He was the above-average kid, but he did have a certain spark. Leadership potential. In high school, he joined the local tossball team and became team captain. He had an eye for strategy and knew how to leverage all his teammates' strengths well. This was the highlight of his life, leading the team. The thrill of it all was intoxicating, but come age 18, he was hit with the hard reality of the sportsman world. He was athletic and a good captain, but not good enough, nowhere near the pro level stuff, so his dream of being a professional tossball player went down the tubes. And so did he, specifically the tubes that people shit down. That's right, he became a janitor. Mind you, it was a nice office building with nice people, but nice people can take stinky shits too. His life was lackluster. He dreamed of something more. He wanted to capture the highs he felt on the tossball field. One day he saw advertising for an amazing opportunity. Apply now and adventure to the Halcyon colony. A new life, a new you, a board-approved you. The captain jumped at the opportunity and applied. He said his goodbyes and left for the outer worlds. Now fast forward 70 odd years in cryo, and he's being awoken by a mad scientist named Phineas. What could go wrong? He lands on Terra 2 and finds himself the captain of a ship, the Unreliable. So now you understand the kind of character the captain is, let's talk about how he plays the game. The captain isn't some tear down the establishment kind of guy, nor is he a corporate lackey. He craves adventure, the thrill. As a captain of a tossball team, he often had to settle disputes and help everyone get along and work together for a common goal, and this is how he approaches the factions and companions. The captain ideally wants to create the best scenario for all, a win-win. He's a kind-hearted dude and will have no qualms about helping all factions as long as it's the right thing to do. It's entirely possible to help most factions get along, but eventually all characters will either have to side with the board or with Phineas, and for this character we think siding with Phineas makes the most sense, but outside of that, don't actively antagonize the board. Try and work to the situation where every single faction likes you. You're a team player, so you'll want to get all the companions and complete their quests, but like I mentioned before, Parvati and Vicar Max are priorities. Ultimately, this build should give you the definitive Outer Worlds experience. You'll be able to adventure with all the companions, do all the companion quests, do all the faction quests, as well as complete them with all the dialogue speech checks and gain access to all the computers and locked doors you want, resulting in the best possible outcomes. Obviously, this is one of the less combat-focused builds, but your companions will more than make up for that. Don't worry, I think we have a gunslinger build coming next, so let me work on that. Like the video if you enjoyed this build, and please do subscribe for more upcoming Outer Worlds content. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Scott from FudgeMuppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.